and certainly not the last, Laura Ingraham Show original, brand spanking new podcast. This is going to be fun. This is going to get really raw, I think. I have a feeling that this is going to go places where we're not quite sure where it's going to end up. But I decided when we made that transition from radio, which was very hard, by the way, Raymond Arroyo, my partner in crime on this, we have some big announcements to make. This is going to be big. We have some very big announcements to make very soon about another iteration of what we do on television, previously on radio and now in the podcast. So we'll keep you in suspense there. But Raymond, it was so hard to say goodbye to radio because for 17 and a half years, it was my family. Yeah. It was tough. I mean, I really was depressed. I mean, I think I had that post-radio depression kind of.
What did you do? Talk to yourself at home? What did you do? Take the microphone into the bathroom with you?
Right. It was. Well, I miss talking to the listeners. But the good thing is, all of you follow me on social media. You'll be able to still call in. You'll still be able to be part of the conversation. But it's just a little different. And you just have to get used to subscribing here at Podcast One, or going to your Purple Podcast app on your iPhone. On Apple iTunes, it's very easy. And I started listening to podcasts. I mean, I've just now been doing it in the car. It's really fun. It's so cool. So we're really, really happy you're here. We're going to be doing, we'll be doing some politics because that's kind of the core of what's happening around. It's been my life for so long. But Raymond and I discussed this, and we thought it was really important with that political core to branch out and expand the conversation to America beyond politics, our daily lives. And Raymond, you made a good point as to why people are hungering for that.
Well, part of it is America today, our communities are shattered. We don't have these things that bring us together anymore. You don't have sports. You don't have film. You don't have theater. Where do you go?
Oh, you have sports. What do you mean you don't have sports?
What I mean is even sports has become a politically toxic and divisive place where you once got, now look, in New Orleans, our saints are like a religion to us. So we wear the regalia. We have our full processions.
Must we? I should have done a timer on how long it took Raymond Arroyo to invoke New Orleans.
The soon-to-be Super Bowl winning.
Who dat nation?
Now you got it.
Who dat?
You're even wearing the black today.
I am all in on the Saints. Okay, I grew up in Connecticut, and I don't want to hear any comments on Twitter or on Instagram about I should be for Tom Brady.
Tom Brady's family's calling in right now.
Guess what? I don't care. I am an adopted child of the South now.
An adopted member of the Who Dat
Nation.
Nation.
of Who Dat, because I have so many friends in New Orleans. But it's like, you're a fair weather fan. No. I mean, if the Redskins were in, I'd be rooting for the Redskins, but Lord knows they have trouble. So,
community is lacking around the country, around the world. This gives you a sense of community, and we are deprived of real conversation with people. So this is a place where we will come together and talk about the things that matter, the things that really move our lives, and that advance our culture. And the arts, parenting, relationships, as well as politics.
And hard things in life that we can get through together, and fun things that we have to start enjoying more in those moments of inspiration, which sometimes seem, far too rare.
Right.
In American society today, but they're out there. This episode of the Laura Ingraham Podcast is brought to you by Stamps.com, the faster and more convenient way to get postage. Go to Stamps.com, click on that microphone at the top of the homepage, and type in Ingram for a special offer. This episode of the Laura Ingraham Podcast is brought to you by Legacy Box. Digitize your old family memories and become the family hero with Legacy Box. Order yours today at LegacyBox.com. Let me ask you a question. In your home right now, how many old photo albums, VHS tapes, film, and audio tapes do you have just lying around? Those are your memories. They're just sitting on a shelf waiting to be played on outdated equipment that you don't own anymore. Well, now there's a solution. It's called Legacy Box. There's never been a better time to dust off those old priceless photos, clean out your closet full of camcorder tapes and aging film reels, and send it to Legacy Box. Legacy Box helps you become organized, and here's how it works. Simply send your Legacy Box kit filled with your old home movies, audio tapes, and pictures, and we'll do the rest, digitizing your moments onto a thumb drive, digital download, or DVD. It's that easy, and it's like magic. With Legacy Box, you can digitize your old family memories and become the family hero. There's nothing better than bringing back lost memories to watch and experience the joy and nostalgia by reliving the glory days. Order your Legacy Box now at legacybox.com.
For a limited time, Laura's listeners get an exclusive discount. Go to legacybox.com/Ingram to get 40% off your first order. Go to legacybox.com/Ingram and save 40% off today. Get started preserving your past.
There is something that has, sadly become omnipresent in our lives. Screens. Handheld screens, tablets, of course, still your computer, your Apple MacBook, whatever you have. Obviously, your TV is now just like a computer. Play everything on it. Well, what has that done to our personal interaction, our connectivity, our mood, our time with family, friends, especially as it relates to young people? There's something we've talked about before. There's no satisfying answer to this, frankly, but it's begun to change us as people.
Well, it's a reality. We're all tethered to these devices. You can't get anywhere without them. You can't make appointments without them. You don't contact people without them. And for those young people, we see this in the lives of our children. This is how they date. We used to go and have to ask a girl out to a dance or ask a girl out to a movies. No more. Everybody Snapchats each other. They're snapping pictures constantly at every location they visit. There are certain teens I've seen do this as if they're addicted. But the studies on this, Laura, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, teen girls who spent more than 5 hours on social media per day had a 50% increase in depressive symptoms, and boys experienced a 35% increase in those symptoms compared to those who used social media only once or 1 or 3 hours a day. So the more time spent here, it seems there is a direct psychological corollary where you see young people giving way to depression. Suicides are way up, which we could get into. But the question is, what's causing that? Why are they driven to depression with something that you would think, and they imagine, connects them to friends and family and acquaintances and opens their world?
I think that this, to some extent, it predates cell phones and social media, because we didn't really recognize teen depression. I don't really think adequately, maybe until about 20 years ago. It was always, that's just being a teen. You're being a teenager. Moody. You're moody. It's because of the way you're developing, and everybody goes through it, and so forth. But this Karen Swartz, who's a psychiatrist, and she's the director of clinical programs at Johns Hopkins Mood Disorder Center, said it's not easy being a teenager, but it's a terrible disservice to young people to dismiss their medical problems as just part of the developmental process. She notes that historically doctors were reluctant to diagnose depression in adolescents because there weren't effective or safe pharmaceutical treatments for it. Now, what happened is Prozac came into being, was approved by the FDA in 1987, other drugs later on, and then the diagnoses began to track with the prescriptions. Yeah, I'm always very suspicious of the pharmacological
connection
impulse. You don't know which is driving which. Is it the diagnoses are up, or is it the pharmaceuticals come and it's a quick fix?
And then there's a reaction.
Yeah. So this is from this piece in the Johns Hopkins Health Review that was published in I believe it was in the fall of 2017. It's fascinating. She said for her patients, Swartz sometimes compares depression to asthma, another medical condition where environmental factors can worsen the situation, hence the screen conversation. With asthma, an increase in dust or pollen could bring on an attack. With depression, it might be a family tragedy or a stressful situation at school, but outside factors don't always play a role in either condition. People who have depression, and especially psychiatrists with depression, are always caught up in whys. Everybody wants a good story to explain it, but sometimes the story is as boring as it runs in your family. You're vulnerable to it. And when the combination of life stress and hormones react, you get it. Sometimes you just have depression. Sometimes you just have asthma. That said, if you ignore the fact that you sneeze every time your pet comes into the house, like a cat, it's hard to imagine that you're ever going to get better. She goes on to talk about in 1998, so before the cell phones really took hold, 3 Baltimore area high school students, including a star lacrosse player at one of the city's top private schools, all took their own lives around the same time. They were unrelated, but the suicides jolted the community. Several schools asked Dr. Swartz to speak with parents, teachers, and students about depression. She quickly realized how little people knew about it. In the following year, she and several colleagues formed the Hopkins-based Adolescent Depression Awareness Program to help high school teachers and students recognize its symptoms. So if you have a person showing certain recognizable symptoms, you say, well, I think that person's having a stroke, call 911. Like if you say, okay, you got numbness in my arm, shortness of breath, pain in the chest. We haven't done that well, though, with depression. With depression, it's still a mystery to so many people that they don't know to take action, she says. The goal with educating people on the basics of the disease is so they know it exists, that it's a real medical problem. Then they might say, oh my gosh, I might have it. And then they say it's treatable, so maybe I should do something. I should talk to someone about it. And she recognizes, she goes on to recognize that parents especially, getting back to the kids, that it's hard for parents to acknowledge that some behavior in their teenager especially is more than just typical teen behavior, the warning signs of when you're really getting off the rails. So parents, when you think about it, as a parent, you also have your own ego.
Right.
Given a choice between my child is just sort of being an annoying teenager and my child has a potentially life-threatening medical problem, you don't want to pick the second. As a parent, you don't want to. Your impulse is not to say, "Oh yeah, this is serious," because it's terrifying to think that your child could have an illness that could lead to death. You don't want to acknowledge it. So, fast forward now to where we are today. So we began to learn more about teen depression, when teen behavior goes from being typically moody to true withdrawal of activities you love, changing in eating, changing in sleeping, more than the regular going through hormones. And you add the smartphone to all that. And you look at other clinical psychiatrists who've studied this for years and years and years, right? And they find out that more than 36% of girls in America have been or are depressed by the time they reach 17. And so why do girls feel this way? Teens and girls in particular. Why do they harm themselves? Now, we're just learning the beginning of this. We don't really haven't unlocked this. Psychiatrists say that kids who self-injure themselves are, in essence, self-medicating. They're in self-medicating
way to
emotions.
Stop the pain.
Yeah, much of the way an adult uses alcohol. They may want to calm themselves down, or conversely, they feel so numb to the world that they just want to feel something.
I also think
they go to that cutting thing, girls cutting themselves.
The social media and the smartphone brings the world all on top of you at once. It all comes in on you. You've got everything at once. And people can target fragile personalities, people who are prone to depression, people who have confidence issues. If they're targeted by classmates, and we've seen this story again and again and again, where somebody on Facebook attacks somebody, posts an unflattering picture, makes the kind of thing that you might have gotten in the hallway at a high school is now posted for everyone to see and react to. And this can cause a chain reaction. And with young people having this constant input, and they're on these devices 10 hours a day, 8 hours a day, 6 hours a day. It's a lot of time. This is the American Psychological Science for the Psychological Science. A study of over 1,700 adults aged 19 to 32, now this is adults, found that those who spent the most time on social media sites had the highest risk of developing depression, whereas those who spent the most time on non-screen pursuits, such as socializing face-to-face, meeting with friends in person, had the lowest risk of depression. There's clearly a connection. Yeah. We need human connection.
Human contact.
Human contact, human voices, real conversation. And I think we're deprived that in this culture. Everything pushes you from that.
Perhaps the most significant impact on the physicians that are cited in this really interesting piece, which I wish I read a year ago. I didn't read it a year ago, but this is really in-depth. They said in the last decade of studying this, again, the impulse to self-harm through cutting, sticking yourself, burning yourself. How did this? They're torturing themselves. They're torturing themselves at a higher number. Is the arrival of social media. They point out that it's hard enough being a teen and having to endure all these hormonal changes, peer pressure, high academic expectations. That's enough alone without the added pressures of comparing their lives to others online. So the hyperconnectivity of today's teenagers, nearly 80% of them have cell phones, means that school day dramas play out in real time.
Right.
Every embarrassing moment, every snippet of gossip has the potential to be recorded, posted, and commented upon. And it's used as a social barometer, a measurement of your achievements and failures. So there's no private failures any longer.
No.
Maybe with the exception of what your final grade is, if someone hasn't hacked into the teacher's database. But with the exception of that, if a girl turns you down when you ask her for a date and the girls start laughing about it on social media, how much more humiliating for a young boy, or for a girl who isn't invited to go to the senior dance and she's alone, and now everybody's talking about it online and she sees the conversation. So she's an outsider looking in at those ridiculing her. It's different from just being in the schoolyard and having a bunch of kids like tee-hee, giggle, giggle. It's posted for everyone to see.
Well, and
that's the devastating aspect of it.
I mean, I would caution parents, if you can keep them off of these sites, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat. The Snapchat is like an addiction for these kids, particularly in high school now and into college. You see it endlessly. But Snapchat is only as the idea is you take a quick picture, you communicate, and it vanishes. Okay? Well, if I can still take an internal picture of that in my device and disseminate that, which often happens. So these kids are, I just think, under a microscope at every moment, and the world is coming in on them. And I think
people used to laugh at cyberbullying. They laugh, it's cyberbullying. That's not real bullying. But the interesting thing, of course, there have been many suicides as a result of cyberbullying. But what's fascinating in the research, the social environment, and how kids deal with interpersonal stress factors. So check this out. The research shows that the kind of injury that kids inflict on each other via social media can actually be more damaging to a young psyche than an actual punch to the face or to the gut. Because that's like a momentary physical thing. And it's not fun. You remember it.
No, the other's
but
a
it doesn't
psychological
leave
wound.
a lasting imprint that you're inadequate. You're an inadequate person. You're less than. It's dehumanizing. You're already kind of, whoa, what's going on here? My body's changing. My mind's changing. I'm not a kid, but I'm not an adult. I'm kind of in the middle. And so that lasting damage to your self-worth, for especially kids who have broken families or different families, it's hard. So there's truth to the rumor. They start believing there's truth to the rumor others are spreading about me. That's what's. So my kids, none of them have phones. My daughter's 13 and a half. She does not have a phone. She stopped asking me for a phone. She asked me for a phone for the longest time, and I said, "You're not getting one." She's actually just not getting a phone, and I think I'm gonna see how long I can go. I mean, that's such a dumb way to say it. I should just say she's not getting a phone ever in high school.
Well, the problem is now you need it for communication because of the way everybody, the schools now communicate online.
They can communicate to me.
All the assignments are online.
Yeah.
At my daughter's school,
Sometimes.
she has a Chromebook. They give her, here, you have to do your assignments on this. Well, the Chromebook is a portal out to the world.
Yeah, we don't have that.
So they can Facebook on it. They can do all kinds of things on it. So I think, sadly, parents now have to be hyper engaged. You have to know what they're on, when they're on, and lock down those devices. And I think you limit the access, and you don't give them access to some of these portals like Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat. I just think, well, we have the evidence. Instagram, Laura, these predators will follow girls, particularly boys too, but girls on Instagram. And because they often post where they are, they don't realize they're giving this predator a GPS into their lives. And it creates all kinds of, unless you have a closed account, which if you're going to have one, you better have a closed account that's only open to those you permit in. But even then, kids are making that decision. Parents have to be involved. Your child's life is at risk. And if they're prone to depression, if they don't have that self-confidence, the chances that they're going to get into trouble or bullied are very high, very high. What else do you do on social media but brag?
Well, and I think that those who engage in that, well, and again, in that impulse to gossip about others, which ends up being on the social media platform a form of bullying, most of those kids end up looking back on it and just having such regrets. But it's there. You never can. I mean, I don't care. You say it's Snapchat, it deletes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess it does. Maybe it's stored somewhere. But when you look back on, some of the quotes from the kids who are now 20, and they're embarrassed because this one gal, Abby Webster, now 20 years old, said that the bully in her brain now shows itself far less frequently. And this is someone who was bullied, and she's now on medication. So we now have a culture of medicated kids for a lot of reasons. You have ADHD, so they're on amphetamines to keep them focused in school, and then others are on antidepressants because of what's happening at home, or add another stress of what's happening online. And then for all the cliches we hear, well, I'm being my authentic self. What is your authentic self? Your authentic self is not what you put online. Your authentic self is who you are in the moment and what you represent face to face to someone. Because anyone can create any persona online. You could look cool.
And many do.
Photoshop your face. You have all these makeup artists on Instagram who the girls follow. A lot of these guys who are men who have turned their Instagram business into multi-million-dollar enterprises. Platforms. Charles is the makeup guy that a lot of the girls follow. He's I don't know if he's transgender or gay. I'm not sure what he is, but he's extremely successful. He's a real entrepreneur, and the girls all follow him because they want to look as good as he looks in his eyeshadow.
I know, but can I ask a question?
I don't understand.
That would be like me going to a lady who's cutting down a tree, and I mean, God bless her, and she might have great technique, but what special technique does he have that a female makeup artist who does this every day, who's always putting eyeshadow on, might have? I mean, it's like a little bit like a doctor. A friend of mine always says they call it a practice because they've done it so regularly. You want somebody who's done it more than you have. I mean, otherwise you're in trouble. So I have seen that guy, and there are a lot of young girls who follow him, and I'm perplexed as to why. There's got to be female. I know they're female makeup artists. Some of them have made us up in television land.
And again, as a parent, I try to learn about myself while I'm parenting, and I've learned a lot about me, like my flaws, my impatience, my at times you put a measurement on your kids according to what you did. And that's normal, like a natural human impulse. Like this generation, every generation does. This is a lazy generation. We had to walk to school 5 miles in the snow, or we did this, or we shoveled our own snow, we cut our own lawn. And I have learned a lot about what I need to improve on, what I need to watch out for. I'm talking about pressure you put on kids. You can't think that your kids are going to be like you, or they're going to have the talents or the lack of. I mean, maybe they're going to be. I keep saying to my kids, I want you to be a lot better than I am. I want you to be taller, smarter, faster, stronger. But the way you are is the way I love you, no matter what. I say that. I try to say that at least once a week to my kids. You're going to fail. Welcome to the world. Just be honest. Honesty, and be kind to others. Like I was at a parent-teacher conference last week, and Nico's a ruffian. He's 8.5. He's so funny. But he's a ruffian, but he has the biggest heart. I think he has the biggest heart of an 8-year-old I've ever seen. Like he's very sensitive. But he's a roughhouser. And I said, Nico, sometimes the kids don't want to roughhouse. And he's like, I just like to tackle and play. I said, yeah, but you can't tackle everybody. Some boys don't like to tackle, and they are, more studious, or they're more, they're littler than you, and I said, you hurt people's feelings. Like, don't hurt people's feelings. Always be conscious of whether you're making someone feel good about themselves or hurting someone's feelings. And he stopped and he looked at me and he bit his lower lip and he got all teary-eyed. But, it's kids want to have that connection with other people, and it's really been interesting for me to see my kids as kids disconnected from it. We've had some periods where we've had some issues with screens, but now I took all of them except my computers that I have that they have to be in the kitchen while they're using. They're all gone from the house. All those screens.
You got to look. Another good rule of thumb: always have a public computer in a public area of the house so everybody can watch it. Otherwise, you get into this siloed, everybody's in their own pods. And what that leads to is when you try to watch a film together as a family, or watch a sporting event as a family, or do something, everybody retreats to their pods. We couldn't do that when we were growing up. We didn't have them. You had one TV in the house, that was it. You either saw that or you read in the corner. So that notion of everyone being siloed off to their own corners, that happens in every sector of American life. It is destructive. The people with their ear pods in and on the computers, no matter where you are, or on their devices, this is not living or interacting. I mean, it's one of the reasons you want to go to places where people are forced to interact. That's why some of these big social gatherings are the best. You should embrace those as a community, and we need to create more of them in American life.
You are listening to the Laura Ingraham podcast, and we hope you like what you hear. Remember, always go to Podcast One, or you can just go to the Apple iTunes podcast little icon. It's usually purple on your screen, and subscribe to the podcast. You'll love it. We have a lot coming up. One of the foremost experts in all of this, in the rise of teen depression and how social media is changing our human connectivity. Dr. Jean Twenty will be with us, and a lot more. Craig Shirley's coming up because we have an important Reagan anniversary this month, which ends up telling us a lot about how we got into this interesting situation politically we're in today, and a lot more on the Laura Ingraham Show podcast.
Any of you ever question your body because of what you see on social media?
I've been so focused on just not eating past 7 and drinking water. On Instagram, I follow people like Kendall Jenner and Kylie Jenner, and they all have this time measure, body image that everyone is expecting from this generation. So I have a lot of self-confidence. I don't hate my body, but I always feel that there's room for improvement all the time.
Do any of you ever feel criticized and hurt by things that are said on social media?
Yes.
What kinds of things might somebody say that's mean?
They could talk about things that you post, things that you wear, things that you say.
I've seen a lot of bullying happen on Snapchat, to be exact, with some of my friends, some people calling them fat, even me, talking about body image.
You're listening to the Laura Ingraham podcast. Delighted you're with us. This is our maiden voyage, and you'll be able to find us on podcastone.com, also your iTunes podcast feature. You can subscribe, and the episodes will drop right into your email, which is really fun. And man, we're all dealing with this issue. You're confronted with this issue of young people, their phones, their lack of connectedness to everything around them, their surroundings, their immediate experiences, friends, family. And this is an issue that, it's not going away unless they just implant the phone into the side of your face, and then you don't have to hold it up, I guess. But otherwise, it's going to be here for some time to come. And the issue of teen depression, anxiety, bullying, we can't overstate how important it is for all of us as Americans, as parents, or maybe you're a grandparent listening to this, to try to make sense of how we got here and how we can maybe take some control back from what these devices have done to us, what we've allowed them to do to us. Joining us now, Dr. Jean Twenge. She's a psychology professor at San Diego State University, author of iGen, Why Today's Super Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood, and what that means for the rest of us. And so much of what she's written and spoken about over the years is a lot of it, sadly, coming to fruition. Dr. Twenge, great to have you on. Thanks so much for joining us on the podcast. Man, you made the debut. You must be pretty special.
I don't know if I want to go there, but thank you for having me.
Absolutely. This is an issue that has probably only gotten worse since your book came out. And with all the convenience that screens bring into our lives, you heard from those students in this AP report of last week of what they're confronted with in our world of screens. As a psychology professor and everything you've researched and studied, what are the warning signs today, especially with the teen brain and how it develops, of real pathology developing from the screens that are around us?
Yeah, so I've been doing this work on generational differences for a long time, about 25 years, and I get used to seeing, interesting generational differences, but they would usually take some time to get there. And around 2011 or 2012, I started to notice much larger shifts, so in particular around mental health. So all of a sudden, more and more teens started to say they felt left out, that they felt lonely, that they more started to fit the criteria for having major depressive disorder, that's clinical level depression. The CDC recently reported a tripling of emergency room visits for self-harm behaviors like cutting among young girls. So we have this really, I think you can't even argue with this. This is a mental health crisis. This is pretty much unprecedented to have such a large increase in mental health issues among the young population in such a short period of time. And I don't think the timing is coincidental because 2011, 2012, that's right as smartphones became common, and it's right as social media moved from something that was kind of optional for teens to being almost mandatory.
Well, right now, parents, I think, are becoming at least more aware of how, especially, I think young girls are extremely vulnerable, even more so than the boys on the cyberbullying because of, girls, the mean girl syndrome and so forth. But I think parents at least are now beginning to realize that they can't put their heads in the sand because they don't know or don't have an Instagram account or have never used Snapchat, but at least they know those things exist now. And I think they're beginning to come to terms with this, or am I exhibiting some wishful thinking here? Maybe it's because I've already had to deal with this issue.
Well, I think there's certainly been more discussion around this issue just in the last few years. But I think it runs the gamut. There are some parents who are like, well, I'm on my phone all the time, so why shouldn't my kid be? And no big deal. This is just how kids live now. And then there's the opposite perspective, which somewhat ironically is the way a lot of Silicon Valley families live, which is, let's get away from this. No social media, no phones until kids are at least, say, 16 or even older.
And when they do that, they tend to be better prepared to deal with the onslaught of what will be coming at them through the screen because their brain is more developed. See, I think 16 is right in the sweet spot of developmental, precariousness. I think 16 is too young.
Yeah. So that's the thing. There's a lot of varying opinions on the age, and of course, it also depends on family situations and the particular kid. But what's shocking to me is how common social media is at a very, very developmentally fraught age, which is middle school and even younger. There are 7-year-olds who have their own account on Musical.ly, which is the social media app that's most popular with elementary school kids. And then there's lots of 11 and 12-year-olds who have their own social media accounts. And what's especially interesting about that is it's actually the law that you have to be 13 years old to have your own social media account, yet that's never enforced.
Well, so parents go ahead and do that. Raymond Arroyo is also with us.
Doctor, what would you recommend to parents? What are the 5 things they absolutely should do? I mean, it sounds like you're for restricting usage of these devices and certainly access to some of these more popular sites until the child is well into their teens.
Well, I think there's a number of things that parents can do. So the age restriction is just one of them. We can start there. So first, at least follow the law and no social media account in your own name before you're 13 years old. And then beyond that, maybe even longer. Same thing with having your own smartphone. I'm now hearing stories of second graders, even first graders who have their own smartphone. The average age to get your first smartphone is now 10. And I think that's clearly too young to hand a child a device which has so much potential for abuse, not just in terms of what they may stumble across, but also in terms of how much time they're likely to spend on it. So there's a growing movement among parents to wait until 8th grade or even later to have them get phones. And I think there's really no absolute need for a kid to have her own smartphone until they start driving. I think that makes some sense at that point to have a smartphone, or at least a flip phone. That's the compromised position. And
right.
Not
that's
quite as dangerous.
That's a great idea. Doctor, the other thing I see all the time, not when I'm at home in New Orleans, but when I'm in Virginia, when I'm in Maryland, when I'm traveling the country, at restaurants, parents often give the children, and I'm talking toddlers, these iPads to keep them, to keep their attention. So they're watching videos or they're playing little games where they're moving things around or just doodling. What does that do developmentally to a young child's mind? And is that desirable at that early age to expose them to those devices?
We don't know yet what effect that has. From what we do know, I can tell you what I think is likely, which is there's probably going to be an effect on attention span. And teachers tell me they're already seeing that among kindergartners.
My family of teachers have said that they saw it from the beginning, and people who started 25 years ago as teachers. My sister-in-law, my brother's a teacher. She just retired, but she said from the time she started until the time she retired, it is a stunning change in the ability to track and follow what the teacher is saying without looking down.
Mm-hmm. Right, because most of the time what kids and teens do on devices, and a lot of adults too, you switch tasks really, really, really quickly, like every few seconds. And they're catnip, we have these dopamine responses, whether it's social media or a game, and they're designed to keep us engaged at every moment. So we spend as much time as possible on the app because that's how these companies make more money. And then you try to go into a classroom or read a book. It's really, really difficult to concentrate when your brain has gotten so used to switching every couple seconds.
Right.
Now, students themselves have seemed to yearn, Dr. Twangy, for simpler times. And it was striking to listen to this AP report because, contrary to what we might think, that students want more, they even know that this has begun to get really out of hand. Let's listen.
What about relationships, dating, and guys?
I'm an avid 80s movies fan, and I wish that things could be the way that they were in the 80s movies.
What is it that they had in the 80s that you don't see so much now?
Having to actually make effort, and now I think that with things like sending a message, people say things that they don't mean, things get lost in translation.
So you want people to talk more?
Yeah.
We have talked about this, Raymond and I, Dr. Twangy, over the years. Raymond has kids that are in that dating age. Mine aren't yet, and I've heard from other parents. It's a wild and woolly world out there now with texting, because they text each other, and some of the other weird things is people are older on that, on those weird hookup sites and so forth. But just that putting yourself out there to ask a girl out, to come to a dance, pick up the phone and talk. I don't know. Do kids call each other and talk anymore? Not really. What does that mean?
Not really. So yeah, it's mostly done Snapchat and texting. And you're right. That's the thing. It's not in real time most of the time. You don't have to put yourself out there and then see the immediate reaction. It's also very anxiety provoking because then you have to wait for a response. There's also just how are they going to develop social skills? That's what I hear from managers when I talk to them about the youngest hires that they're making. They'll say, iGen, they have a lot of strengths, they have a good work ethic, but they'll almost always say that I'm surprised at how many will not look me in the eye. And they don't have the social skills that we're going to need them to have for the jobs we're hiring.
You know what else? What is odd, given how quick phones make reaction. People react so quickly on phones to things. They don't think, as that student said. They don't think. They just post. They don't think. Is sometimes when you speak to younger folks who are always on the phone, there's a slow reaction time. Raymond and I have noticed this, and I've hired over the years hundreds and hundreds of people, without a doubt, hundreds of interns. Like, hello, are you there? Like, it's almost like without hitting the button, they can't process the words. It's weird.
Well, doctor, you're talking to it. You're speaking
weird.
About reading human cues.
Yes.
Eye motions, the facial cues. All of that is lost. In fact, it's an interesting question. A friend of mine who's a casting director told me a few weeks ago, we were having the conversation, she's finding when they have to bring young actors in, the young actors take her triple the time to cast because they don't have that facial skill, that human skill of just being able to exchange emotions and react. So they look beautiful, beautiful kids, but they can't. They don't have that facility because they're not exercising it every day.
Yeah, there's an interesting study that looked at this. Took sixth graders, so 11, 12-year-olds, and half of them went to a camp for 5 days with no devices, and the other half didn't. And I bet you can guess which group at the end of that, just 5 days, was better able to read emotion cues on other people's faces. Of course, it was the group who had the 5 days without screens.
That is fascinating.
Wow.
Well, they're forced into interaction. You have to.
But you know what else you find? You find you're happier. I find, and I'm now it's my own, focusing on yourself, your personal experience. But when I leave screens, and it's usually when I'm hiking. Even when I'm hiking, I've used screens, which is another story. But when I really had to go to Africa, and now even that's changed because you can get cell phone service in parts of Africa, like where I was before, where it was remote, you couldn't. But I was happiest then. I feel like kind of nostalgic, doctor, for that period of time where you didn't have the excuse to go to your phone. You truly could be disconnected. So again, the great irony of being connected makes you feel less in the moment, less present, present in what you're experiencing, feeling. Even at concerts. I love when someone's performing at a concert, an artist, a performer, singer, songwriter. Put your cell phones down. I don't want to see a screen. Put them down. Because you're not looking at me. You're looking at me through a screen. That's not me. Right. I'm me here. Don't look at me through a screen. Look at me. Mm-hmm. Listen. Use your ears. Your sensory. You're depriving yourself of the senses.
Correct.
And I do believe people end up, after their withdrawal symptoms are over, the shakes. So are there actually withdrawal symptoms from smartphone cutoff, doctor?
Deprivation.
Yeah, so that's another thing. Research hasn't really caught up with people's everyday experience yet. There's a few studies that have asked people, say, to give up Facebook for a week or so. But that might be still having those withdrawal symptoms after a week. We don't have a lot of long-term studies yet to know, for sure what the effects are. But, just anecdotally, stories like yours are extremely common, even among iGen, even among younger people who you'd think would be even more attached to the phone. You know, some of them do describe that withdrawal symptom, feeling shaky when they can't get to their phone. But a lot of them also say, hey, you know, my teacher gave me this assignment. I had to put down my phone for an hour and go out in nature. And they love it. And they love having a break. And they say it's a relief. So there's these kind of mixed emotions, like these withdrawal things of like, I'm supposed to be checking my email. I'm supposed to be seeing if I get any texts. I'm seeing if, what's going on Instagram. But then on the other hand, there's this feeling of relief, like, hey, you know, I'm free now. I can actually pay attention to what's going on around me.
There was a school that my children went to. They attended middle school there, and it was very retro in the sense that you had to take notes. There were no devices allowed in the room. They had to write everything by hand. The assignments were turned in. But that is not the norm in schools anymore. They love the online, you know, everybody's got a Chromebook, everybody's got their pad. I guess because it makes grading easier, the conveyance of information, there's less paper. But there is something to be said about the tactile experience. No, Doctor?
I think that's an issue. I think the even bigger issue is the distraction issue. Uh-huh. So this is what I hear from parents and students themselves all the time. You know, oh, but my assignments are online. And then that means that if, say, especially an assignment that requires them, you know, to be on the internet, especially if you're iGen, you grew up, you know, switching tasks and stuff, you're trying to focus on writing your essay or whatever, and then you have the text coming in, and then you have, you know, all the temptation to go online and look something up. And you look something up, and then you see an ad for, you know, 20 pictures of celebrities who had horrible plastic surgery, and 2 hours later you're like, oh, I didn't write my essay.
Yeah, and then you go down a black hole of click, 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 and then for little kids, they're sometimes in a really dark places really fast. Which leads me to the question of, and we're going to devote an entire probably show to this later on, but pornography is still the biggest seller on the internet as a commodity. And it's available for free. It's available even darker and darker pornography. Kids, especially boys, are so susceptible to this. And no longer do you go to, you know, read your father's Playboy hidden under the bed somewhere. You're clicking through to interactive, disturbing live chats with women and men. And that is so heartbreaking to me. For the innocence of little children and what they envision as normal or intimacy. It's warped.
Yeah, and this is another huge problem. You know, it's not just having the phone in your hand all the time. It's all the stuff that's out there. And there's at least one survey to suggest that the average age when boys are exposed to pornography online for the first time is 9. So this is just, they're getting exposed to this stuff at younger and younger ages, and it warps exactly what you're saying. It warps their perception of what adult relationships and adult sexuality is like. And that seems to already be having some impacts among particularly young men in their 20s. And, you know, anecdotally in the reports of what a lot of young women are saying about what young men expect from sex these days. And then the other thing that is somewhat unexpected is also an increasing percentage of both young men and young women who are not having sex. And some people think that might be because they're watching pornography instead.
And then when they're married, they can't have a normal, you know, sex life, and they're caught into this web of, well, it's dysfunction. It's dysfunction delivered to their handheld device.
Well, it creates artificial expectations of what a woman is, what a man is, naturally the true intimacy can't compete with it. And then there are certain chemicals that are released as well, Doctor, isn't it? When you know, I've read a lot of studies when boys first encounter this, and predominantly it's boys. That the chemicals are released that change the wiring in their brain and their pleasure receptors.
Yeah, so there's a lot of implications here, and you know, this growth of pornography tends to disconnect sex from emotional intimacy, And where you really see that is on college campuses, where the norm is what used to be called a one-night stand is now sometimes called a hookup of...
God, one night would be a long-term relationship, Dr. Twang.
Right, exactly.
Now, if you're into 1 hour, it's a long-term commitment online.
And it's not even just the short amount of time. It's that, so sociologists have studied this about the sex life on campus these days, and the standard is for sex that does not involve emotions, which just blows my mind, is this idea that's the standard, that's the expectation, and that what you're never supposed to be is somebody who wants to have more closeness. That's described. The word they use is thirsty, and that kind of means what clingy used to mean. And what that actually means is you actually want somebody to love you and have a closer relationship with them. There's another phrase on college campuses. It's called catching feelings. Like, you have a hookup partner and you caught feelings for them, as if feeling love or affection is a disease.
Yeah. Meanwhile, they're the ones catching diseases. They're in this kind of disconnected.
Sometimes quite literally.
Yeah. No. This is. Well, look. The only way to kind of get through it is for us to have our eyes wide open. You can't wish it away. You have to know what's out there.
Not in the Nicole Kidman, Tom Cruise way.
No.
Okay, go ahead. I'm old enough to remember that reference.
You can't wish it away. You have to confront the world as it is, and figure out a way to preserve your core values, understanding that we're all flawed, we're all gonna make mistakes. But especially when you're raising kids or giving even your adult kids advice about how to deal with their kids. As a grandparent, there are warning signs all around you, flashing red. And when there's a red light, you got to stop. When there's a yellow light, you got to go really slowly and look around you before you proceed. But we have to get through it together. I mean, this is where it kind of does take a village. As a single mom, I can say my friends have really helped me think this through with my own kids, and I've made some mistakes. And I mean, I cried some afternoons, like making mistakes, leaving a tablet around my house that kids could get into. I cried. I'm like, oh my God, what did they see? And I was so upset. And you have to forgive yourself if you fall down and try to do better. But this is a great conversation. Dr. Twangy, thank you so much. Jean Twangy here on the Laura Ingraham Show wrote a seminal book called iGen, about growing up in this connected world. We really appreciate it, Dr. Twangy. Come back soon, would you please?
Sounds good.
All right, we're going to take a break on the Laura Ingraham podcast. Coming up, what Reagan tells us today about the political standoff that we're in. The new year means a new you, and it means you're spending more time on yourself and your others, your friends, your family, less time on running back and forth to the mailbox. So stop going to the post office to send letters and packages when you don't have to. Save time and money this year by using Stamps.com instead. Stamps.com brings you all the amazing services of the U.S. Postal Service right to your computer at home. Stamps.com is the faster and more convenient way to get postage. You simply use your computer to print all U.S. official postage for any letter, any package, any class of mail, anywhere you want to send it. And the mail carrier picks it up. No more lugging mail to the post office. No more hassle. Stamps.com not only saves you time, it saves you money, too. With Stamps.com, you get discounted postage rates that you can't get even at the post office. Stamps.com is the convenient, easy, and reliable way to send mail. And right now, you can get a 4-week trial plus postage and a digital scale. Start the new year off right by going to Stamps.com, click on the microphone at the top of the homepage, and type in Ingram. That's Stamps.com, enter Ingram. We're back on the Laura Ingraham Show podcast, and many of you might know this, but not all of you, that my roots in politics, so much of what I ended up doing and what ended up happening in the American media on the conservative side, of course, it happened because of Ronald Reagan. Were it not for Reagan, we wouldn't be doing the show, Fox News wouldn't be here, probably wouldn't have Trump. A lot would be different in our country. So I thought it was important to bring on Craig Shirley, Reagan biographer extraordinaire, to discuss some of the ways that Reagan's warnings to the nation are taking on new life today, and his basic thoughts about our role in the world and the need to preserve our freedom, our traditions. You and I grew up kind of at the same time in the same era.
I love listening to you because my life tracked very closely with you. I mean, we're both products of greatest generation, baby boom generation. And I grew up middle class. My father was a city firefighter in Syracuse, New York, and we struggled to make ends meet like you did. And we went to Cape Cod, too, on vacation, only we went up with a trailer because we couldn't afford to rent a motel or a hotel or anything like that. We took up an old trailer that my father had fixed up, and we went to a campground there in North Truro and stayed there. It was pretty rough. No air conditioning and cooking outside. And
I'll get the violins for you there, Craig.
Yeah.
I would have taken your trailer over Ramona's hot box house any day. Okay, so give me a break. Now, okay, let's go back. Let's talk about this month. When you think back on everything that's happening, all the back and forth in politics and shutdowns and partial shutdowns and so forth. But let's talk about what Reagan did in this farewell address to the nation. And let's start with one part that was your favorite, which was when he discussed the scourge of communism and beating it back. Let's listen.
Nothing is less free than pure communism, and yet we have the past few years forged a satisfying new closeness with the Soviet Union. I've been asked if this isn't a gamble, and my answer is no, because we're basing our actions not on words, but deeds. The détente of the 1970s was based not on actions, but promises. They'd promised to treat their own people and the people of the world better, but the Gulag was still the Gulag, and the state was still expansionist, and they still waged proxy wars in Africa, Asia, and Latin America.
Reagan, talking about the hopefulness of this new relationship with the Soviet Union at the time. Craig, it's interesting to hear that in light of the ongoing conversations and negotiations we're having with China. And I often think of what would Reagan do vis-a-vis China, because we didn't trade with the Soviet Union. We didn't engage economically with them. That was part of the Reagan approach, correct?
That was part of the Reagan approach. We did use, some raw materials that came to the West and some to the United States, but we didn't have, they didn't have a manufacturing plant to speak of, except something like 55% of their GDP was devoted to national defense, and the other 45% was devoted to the gulags and starving their own people. They didn't really export anything in the Soviet states, so there wasn't anything to trade about.
Well, and today we have China always making these promises. Oh, when we do these trade agreements, it's going to be fair, and then it turns out it never was. And so Trump comes along and says, no, words aren't enough. Actions. We need to see that China is changing its actions, and obviously repression of human rights, persecution of Christians, persecution of Muslims, horrific treatment of individuals engaging in what we consider to be free speech. They don't believe in it. The parallels between today's China and what Reagan confronted in the Soviet Union. Discuss that for us.
Well, communism is still communism, and communism is by definition, going back to Marx has been expansionist, is that Marx wanted a one world government, and the Soviet Union followed that ideology. The Soviet Union has now given up that ideology, but China is still a communist state and still has expansionist, designs. They might be a little bit more creative about it than the Russians were, less threatening on the face of it. But the state of China is expansionist, communistic, and they have their gulags too. They have their they oppress their people too. So I mean, they may be more to the east of the Soviet Union or Russia now, but the goals remain the same.
Well, and I think again the big question for Trump is whether he's going to take China's word for it in these negotiations, or say, something, we're going to try to return a lot of the manufacturing to the United States that our companies, because again, a lot of these stupid government policies, our companies sent over to Asia much to the detriment of our own national security, given all the technology transfers we've seen, and our workforce. It'll be fascinating to see what happens.
If I was to advise Trump on this, or anybody dealing with the communist China, is that never ever trust anybody from the left. Never, whether it's communist, Democratic Party, liberalism, socialism, anybody on the left, because their only goal is the acquisition of power. And for them, the truth is just another option. They will say the truth when it serves their purposes, and they'll come out with lies when lies serve their purposes. So you cannot trust anybody on the left. You just can't.
And Craig, you and I both have talked about this before, but one of my favorite parts of Reagan's farewell address, which resonates today, right up into the present, is his discussion of the teaching of American history. And I shudder to think what Reagan would say today. And given how kids are taught to hate America, hate our founders are racist, ripping down statues. We'll share some of this with our podcast listeners and then discuss it.
An informed patriotism is what we want. And are we doing a good enough job teaching our children what America is and what she represents in the long history of the world? Those of us who are over 35 or so years of age grew up in a different America. We were taught very directly what it means to be an American. We absorbed almost in the air a love of country and an appreciation of its institutions.
Craig, I get chills when I hear that, because that's, of course, what I was taught in school. Even in going into the 1970s, we still were taught to love America. But today it's very, very different.
Well, not only to love America, but respect for America. And we actually taught about the founders and the framers and the Constitution, the Declaration, the Revolutionary War, and what was at stake in the Revolution, the Civil War, the War of 1812, certainly World War II, and what was at stake there, which was our very existence. Is that all these things and many, many more, the Civil Rights Movement and Brown versus Board of Education, I could sit here, we could rattle them off all day, everything and 1,000 other things that we're taught, none of which is taught in American public schools anymore. It's a danger, but it's becoming more dangerous if possible.
Yeah, I mean, again, that classic Reagan line that we've got to teach history not based on what's in fashion, but what's important.
Yes.
What's important? Why the Pilgrims came here? The D-Day, the important moments, the inflection points in American history that changed the world. Craig, there was another. I quote this a lot when I speak across the country because I try to practice it. I don't think I practice it very well, but it's when Reagan talks about how to affect real change, starting with your family.
Let me offer lesson number one about America. All great change in America begins at the dinner table. So tomorrow night in the kitchen, I hope the talking begins. And children, if your parents haven't been teaching you what it means to be an American, let them know and nail them on it. That would be a very American thing to do.
Craig, I try to do that and probably don't do as well at it as I should at the dinner table. But boy, all change begins at the dinner table. A simple statement, but boy, it just resonates.
Oh, it resonates for me. I mean, that was my upbringing. That was every night when my father wasn't at the fire department. The five of us sat at the dinner table and we argued over the Vietnam War, and we argued over the environment, we argued over politics, and we argued over culture, and we argued over the Beatles and this and that and the other thing. But it was an education process for my brother and my sister, myself. My parents, there wasn't any electronic devices. There was no TV. It was just us eating dinner and mostly enjoying each other's company, but always learning.
Yeah, and Craig, it goes to the point of how many parents actually have dinner with their kids today. Another change in American society, which is for the worst, and precious few probably have dinner with their parents today. If they do, they're all looking at their iPhones. I've got to say, the good thing about my television schedule is that it does allow me to have dinner with my kids most nights.
That's great.
And part of the reason I had to get out of the radio, because I was so tired.
Yeah.
I was so tired doing a morning radio show and then the nighttime TV show that I really don't think I wasn't at my best. I don't think I was doing my best as, interacting with people, just because when you're so tired. So I'm so glad I have that little bit of more extra energy to lecture my kids.
Barbara Bush gave a marvelous commencement speech at Smith College many years ago, and she told the graduating class, she said, when you're on your deathbed, you're not going to be thinking about your briefcase or the contents of your briefcase or that report you missed filing or that presentation or that meeting. You're thinking about your life and your children and your family, and you're going to think about those are going to be the important things. And I think that resonates. That was a timeless piece of advice from Barbara Bush. The other part of of Reagan's speech that I liked too was he talked about the men and women of the Reagan Revolution, and in that I felt like he was talking.
We'll play it
because
let's play. We're going to play that, okay. And then Craig will respond.
We've done our part, and as I walk off into the city streets, a final word to the men and women of the Reagan Revolution, the men and women across America who for 8 years did the work that brought America back. My friends, we did it. We weren't just marking time. We made a difference. We made the city stronger. We made the city freer. And we left her in good hands. All in all, not bad. Not bad at all.
I felt like he was talking to me and to my wife Zareen and to you and all of us who went to Washington as children of the Reagan Revolution, because we were conservatives. We believed in this man. We believed in his mission. We wanted to be a part of it. We wanted to be a part of history, and that resonated. That touched me as much as anything. I remember watching that night and getting a little bit teary watching him talking about us, because we had sacrificed. We had given up a lot of things. We had to earn the derision of a lot of liberals and people in the media and the Washington Post and others who looked down their nose on conservatives and Reaganites and all of us who went to Washington in the 80s. But I often felt like it must have been similar for the young people who followed JFK into government and into Washington, who were moved and motivated by him too. So I am always going to be defined. You will always be defined. Zareen, others, we will always be defined by the 80s and as children of the Reagan Revolution. And I think that there's a lot of people around the country, thousands of people who are very proud of that.
Well, and I think that at the time it was the passing of the torch, and he was saying it's yours now. Now, what are you going to make of this country? And anew, bringing this up to today, here we are once again. We have an eternal struggle between the forces that want to contract individual freedom because the government knows best, and those who want to imbue the country with an informed individual freedom based in civic virtue, our religious grounding, our families. But that struggle with social media and all the new inputs in our democratic system, it feels in many ways more acute, but maybe it's just because I live it every day. I don't know.
I think it is more acute, but I think it's in part because the meat, and you do live it every day, obviously, and I live it not the way you do, but we are awash in media now, in cable and in radio and in the internet and 1,000 other delivery devices that get us information and get us engaged in the conversation. Whereas in the 80s, we had the CNN was just a gleam in Ted Turner's eye, pretty much. Not many people had cable at the time. You had the three networks and the daily newspapers, and of course you didn't have talk radio because of the Fairness Doctrine. So it wasn't in your face, or it wasn't just part of it. There was a time to breathe and kind of relax and smell the roses, and that's less so today. And unfortunately, because there's so much competition in media, is that sometimes is that the ratings war comes down to a shouting match between MSNBC and CNN to see who can say the most outrageous things about Donald Trump or conservatives or Republicans.
And I also think, Craig, at the risk of sounding fuddy-duddy-ish, which I really don't want to. I don't really want to sound like a fuddy-duddy because it's boring.
No, that's
that's not what we want for the first podcast. But I also think it's hard.
That's my job.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard when you're at a point, and Raymond and I talk about this all the time, when the fundamentals of society are things people don't agree on. Like when we were debating things, and let's go back to like 1980, 1986. Or 1984, I remember we threw the Reagan re-election. We had a huge bash at the Hanover Inn. It was so much fun for Reagan's re-election. We had election night party.
Right.
But you didn't have debates about, well, should Robert E. Lee's statue be torn down, or is a national anthem racist? Or it wasn't that bad.
We were talking about more important things. We were thinking about more important things. Right.
But I also think that bedrock of our founding wasn't as questioned. It wasn't as called into question then as it is now. Raymond, do you agree? Raymond just walked in.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we're in a situation now where the culture has shattered, and we lack these central figures to galvanize us, to draw us together.
Informed.
Reagan was that father figure for so many, beyond politics, because he had, Craig has written so eloquently about this, because of his long history in Hollywood, as a sports broadcaster, he had touched these various aspects of
American
culture
life
and kind of brought it together. And for that World War II generation, he brought glamour, he brought patriotism, and there was an eloquence about him that I think he wove into the American experience for that entire era. And Craig, I think you'd agree, we have not had anyone like that, capable of that kind of cultural force or influence since him in the political realm.
No, we won't. And we would probably, I'm not going to predict the future, but our politics, Raymond, has changed so much.
Yeah.
Because don't forget, too, is that part of that warm glow about Reagan is, he was a Democrat. When he ran for president in 1980, he'd been a registered Democrat longer than he'd been a registered Republican. He'd been a registered Democrat since 1932. He first voted for Franklin Roosevelt and voted for him 4 times. But he moves to the Republican Party because when he does, he says, "Well, I didn't leave the party; it left me." But even so, he's a Democrat, and I think that is a very much overlooked aspect of Reagan's life. He didn't use the Protestant I, me. The Catholic we, us, and ours. And if you listen to a lot of Reagan's speeches, he sounds like John Kennedy. And he was, in many ways, a cultural Catholic. His father was Catholic.
Right.
He was raised in a Catholic household. So I think that he was a unique conservative in that he was very much a small L libertarian, but he was also a very involving individual because he was also Emersonian. He was a unique blend. Is the best I can get at between a cultural conservative, a libertarian, a former Democrat, but he synthesizes all these things into a cogent philosophy, which at its basis was personal freedom.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should end on the iconic Reagan moment where he again invokes the shining city on the hill, going back to, as it's so fitting, going back to the Bible, the shining city, biblical reference. And it's, again, this is toward the very end of Reagan's farewell address.
I've spoken of the shining city all my political life, but I don't know if I ever quite communicated what I saw when I said it. But in my mind, it was a tall, proud city built on rocks stronger than oceans, windswept, God-blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds living in harmony and peace. A city with free ports that hummed with commerce and creativity. And if there had to be city walls, the walls had doors, and the doors were open to anyone with the will and the heart to get here. That's how I saw it and see it still.
Well, people, I think, hear that, Craig, and they say, well, it's beautiful. It's very optimistic about the future of the country. It's grand prose. I mean, the writing is you see the windswept cliffs of America and all that she stands for. But then the part, of course, where he talks about the walls. If a city had to have walls, they had doors, and the doors were open to anyone with a will and the heart to get here. I think the pro-immigration crowd, amnesty crowd, say, see, Reagan would say all these people who have the will to get here should be able to stay here. Is that the right way to interpret that?
No, it's not. And I've had disagreements with several people over the last several years about this, is that in the 80s and the 70s and the 60s is that we were talking about political refugees who were escaping communist oppression. And in the case of the people who were coming from South America or Central America, were coming, or from the Caribbean, were coming to escape Castro's Cuba, Nicaraguan communists, the communist regime there, and the communist terrorists who were terrorizing El Salvador. So when they came, they were coming for political reasons, not economic reasons. One of Reagan's points in his farewell address, he talked about his favorite story about the Vietnamese boat people and how one of the Navy was sent out to help rescue them, and one of the men in the Vietnam boat people waves up at a sailor and says, "Hello, freedom man." That's why he was coming to America. That's why he was fleeing the murderous Khmer Rouge and Pol Pot in Cambodia and Vietnam, was to escape to freedom. And ironically, it was the Democratic Party that opposed the Vietnamese boat people coming to the United States because there was an indictment of the failure of communism. Jane Fonda ran ads attacking the Vietnamese boat people. George McGovern sniffed and said that Asian people should stay in Asia. And it was Reagan, it was the conservatives, and it was Republicans who welcomed the Vietnamame boat people because they were seeking freedom. We have always been a beacon of freedom. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. But we're not about coming here for a job or for a better paycheck or for the free stuff that our society and our culture and our government gives.
Craig Shirley, thank you so much. It's just so great to have a long period of time. I feel like we're, in a way, going to a great college course here on American history, and not one where I'm chatting with my friends. I'm like, I'm not listening. I'm actually listening here. Reagan's farewell address. Craig, thank you so much for discussing its importance to today's conversation, political conversation, an enduring truth that Reagan would not want us to forget. It's just always such a pleasure talking to you. Will you come back soon?
Absolutely. Anytime you want, Laura.
All right. Craig Shirley, Reagan biographer extraordinaire, here on the new Laura Ingraham Show podcast.
Hey, it's Kamala Harris, and this is my mood mix. A song that has always made me dance. Check the rhyme, A Tribe Called Quest. You know I'm talking about Fife.
Oh, no.
Laura.
This is...
Here, once again...
Everyone's trying to be more human and present a side of themselves that you don't know. And after listening to this, that you never want to know.
You never want to know. Here's the problem. I mean, Kamala Harris strikes me as a very nice person. Obviously her politics are her politics, but don't try to do something that's so far outside of your personality wheel that you look like a phony. And we've been seeing a lot of this in the grind up to 2020, whether it's Joe Biden doing his routine and we have some other examples coming up. But Kamala Harris should do something that would, you can humanize yourself within things that make you comfortable. But to try to pass her off as the, co-host on Solid Gold, it doesn't quite work. And so she's trying to get down with the people and share her best tunes. I'm not sure this is the right way to reach out to the homies.
And by the way, this is where she sings. Let's listen.
A song that has to be played loud because you have to hear the bass. The Sun is Shining by Bob Marley and the Wailers. Right? The sun is shining and the rain.
Thank goodness for the laughter. What do I always say, Laura? If you can't sing, don't sing. Please. Don't do that. There's nothing worse than somebody off key trying to sing. I just don't know how this endears. I don't know who is excited by this. Now, I had actually taken the time, which I bet you and no one else did. I took the time to read a review of Kamala Harris's new book, Something About a Journey, in the New York Times the other day. And in it, I didn't realize her father, I believe, is Jamaican. Okay. And so she has this deep root to Bob Marley. She grew up listening to Marley. She really loves him. Okay. We'll talk about that. But to try to recreate the greatest hits on TV is probably not something that would be advised.
Well, pretty much everyone is running for president, as far as I can tell. Every Democrat with any name ID is running for president. You have that, is it Joaquin Castro? I always get
Castro, not to be confused with his twin brother.
Who was the HUD secretary for Obama.
Right.
He's running, it looks like. That Tulsi Gabbard is running,
correct,
who's already run into a lot of problems in California.
Bernie is considering a run again.
Let's stand with the workers now. I scream like old people scream. Why do I do that? Because the corporations are stealing from the people. The corporations.
And then Brother Joe Biden will be running, even though
God's
Obama
honest
said
truth.
we needed
God's
new
honest
blood.
Truth.
New
I
blood.
do 500 push-ups a day. I could take Trump out the back and pummel him. I'm in good shape. Joe's very fit.
And then there's Elizabeth Warren.
Let's listen to her, beer moment.
Hold on a sec. I'm going to get me a beer. My husband Bruce is now in here. You want a beer?
No, I'll pass on the beer for now.
You sure? Okay, say hello to folks.
Yes.
So, this is my sweetie.
Hello.
He's the best. Thank you for being here.
Pleasure.
I'm glad you're here.
That probably was the most embarrassing home social media
hello
video
there,
attempt.
dear. Great to see you.
Hi, now I'm going to get a beer. How about the husband looks like he'd rather be getting a tooth extraction.
And then she swacks him on the fanny as he leaves the frame. That was a little...
Get a room.
Yeah, that was a little odd.
I don't know. Well, I don't want to know what goes on in that kitchen.
Yeah.
It gives the phrase galloping gourmet another meaning. And then, of course, Obama, it looks like Obama's favorite of all of the possible candidates. It's not slam track Joe Biden. It's pretty boy Beto O'Rourke.
So I'm here at the dentist, and we're going to continue our series on the people of the border. I'm here with Diana, my dental hygienist. Diana's going to tell us a little bit about growing up in El Paso.
Hi, I'm Diana. I was actually born here in El Paso. My mom is from a small town in Mexico.
I know about the border.
That it's a beautiful community. We all support each other. We love each other. And it's not what everybody else thinks badly about us. It's actually a wonderful place to live and grow up.
I don't understand how showing yourself in the middle of a dental surgery in any way demonstrates that you are equipped to be the president of the United States when the only job you've ever held is a congressman in Texas. And the last time you ran for public office, you lost. How does that work out? I don't understand this at all. It reminded me of Glenn Beck. Remember when Glenn Beck had hemorrhoid surgery or something?
Okay, Raymond, if I start live streaming any procedure at all, ever, live streaming a medical procedure.
Fear not.
You have permission at this point in time to just smother me with a pillow. Honestly, you can't let that happen. But
Jack Kevorkian is your next guest.
This kind of connects back to what we talked about earlier with social media seemingly giving us this ability to reach people. Obviously, newscasts, podcasts, instructional videos for how to put together a barbecue grill.
It's all too immediate. It's all too easy.
It's all there.
It's all too easy.
But then when you're desperately trying to be something you're not, which a lot of these people are, it comes across as phony.
It's embarrassing.
It's embarrassing. But you know who is who he is when you're with him and when he's on camera, when he's addressing the nation, is Donald Trump. Okay, so he's not playing. He doesn't use social media. Has never used social.
Like him or loathe him, whether he irritates you or not, The guy is who he is. Donald Trump is who he is. And that is, I think, for everyday people coming into his orbit,
he's not so polished. Maybe he's not so polished sometimes. And then when he is very presidential, they say, oh, he's robotic, like he was when he spoke from the Oval Office.
Right.
But he was with Clemson, the national championship football team that, of course, had an amazing game against Alabama.
That was a hard game. Both
game.
Our teams whipped by Clemson in those last 2 weeks. That hurt.
That was bad.
Poor Notre Dame and then Alabama. That was brutal.
So
but they played a hell of a game.
They had played a great game.
A hell of a game.
Okay, they all went to the White House yesterday, and here's the problem: is they don't have catering staff because that's non-essential employees.
Right, the shutdown.
Employees. Normally, they would have some decent sandwiches or something.
Does this mean Trump is like making his own eggs in the morning?
I wondered that.
Melania, pass me that beater.
I don't like the egg beaters. I like the full eggs.
So
I want the yolks. Yeah, some Lucky Charms. That's what I want. I need some Lucky Charms.
Baron, just have the Lucky Charms today. It'll be over soon.
No, Lucky Charms. My mother would never buy me Lucky Charms.
I
chemicals
love the Lucky Charms.
The chemicals in Lucky Charms?
The
they
coloring.
still make that?
Sure. Colors your colon beautifully. All kind of
the kaleidoscope
the colors of the rainbow.
Yeah, it's the kaleidoscope of colors in your digestion.
They're magically delicious.
So this is how Donald Trump presides over what is mounds and towers of fast food, towers of hamburgers.
Big Macs, Wendy's.
At the White House.
French fries.
Let's listen.
Now, what's your favorite thing here, Mr. President?
I like it all. It's all good stuff.
Do you
great American food. And it'll be very interesting to see at the end of this evening how many are left.
Do you prefer McDonald's or Wendy's?
I like them all.
That's a tough question.
If
not
it's
a
American,
softball.
I like it. It's all American stuff.
By the way, the Clemson team came in. They were tweeting out after attending this East Room dinner.
I bet it was fun
for the president. They all loved it. They said, "Here I am. Here's the evidence." And they had like the Big Mac box and the half-eaten Big Mac. They loved it.
Oh, of course
they loved
did.
it. These are college kids.
How
about
the bratty Patriots who wouldn't come to the Oval Office to meet Trump after they won the Super Bowl?
Why don't we make a little
including
bet?
Tom Brady, by the way.
Let's make a little bet. If the Saints whip the Patriots in the Superdome, the Saints will be at the White House.
Watson will come, right? Absolutely.
I think Drew Brees will too.
Well, they better come. They better come.
Well, your Patriots didn't. Your Patriots didn't.
They're not
come.
my Patriots.
Okay.
I've never been a New England Patriots fan. I grew up in Connecticut, and I wasn't a big football fan for National Football League growing up. I was more of a college, but I was never a big Patriots fan, honestly. I mean, but hold on. Trump then kind of he's like, remember Carol Merrill in the old Let's Make a Deal, and she would display the man on radar range and all. Right? This was Trump.
And show them what will win.
And show. Do you want the small box or what's behind the curtain? All right, let's listen.
We have the national champion team, as you know, Clemson Tigers, and they had a fantastic game against Alabama. And they're all here. They're right outside the room. And I think we're going to let you see them. But I'll bet you as much food as we have. We have pizzas. We have 300 hamburgers, many, many French fries. All of our favorite foods. I want to see what's here when we leave, because I don't think it's going to be much.
The fact that someone had to go out and get it. How did they keep it warm? Okay, these are things I'm thinking of.
I do not know.
All right, you're listening to the Laura Ingraham podcast. Well, that does it for us here. I'm very hungry after that. And what would Michelle Obama have done with all of that fast food? Well, what did she say? French fries were her favorite food. Maybe she would have joined in.
Well, I'm going to get many, many fries now.
All right. We'll see you on the next Ingraham podcast. This episode of the Laura Ingraham podcast is brought to you by Stamps.com, the faster and more convenient way to get postage. Go to Stamps.com, click on that microphone at the top of the homepage, and type in Ingraham for a special offer. This episode of the Laura Ingraham podcast is brought to you by Legacy Box. Digitize your old family memories and become the family